Thank you so much for joining us. You are joining the power of state-led collaboration, building interoperable education data systems, featuring the Ed-Tech Collaboratory, which we will hear from in just a moment. So on today's webinar, we'll do some introductions in just a moment. You're going to learn more about the Ed-Tech Collaboratory and unified transcripts, as well as scalable solutions. We have some questions teed up for a panel discussion, but we also really want to hear from you all and get some questions from you. So feel free at any time into the chat, put some questions that you have for the Ed-Tech Collaboratory, or you can put them into the Q&A box, and then we will give some thank you and next steps. And I am the facilitator today. My name is Chloe Sanducci. I'm the project director of Project Unicorn at Innovate EDU. And for those of you who don't know what Project Unicorn is, it is a national coalition of organizations that you see here on the screen that are coming together to advance data interoperability in the K-12 education, specifically promoting open data standards. And it's really a community that comes together. What we're trying to create is this community who's making the broader case for secure interoperability by determining those shared priorities. We work in partnerships with both school systems as well as the EdTech providers and vendors to really understand the importance and benefits of interoperability and create that demand side push. And we always like to set the stage by defining interoperability during our webinars. So interoperability is the seamless, secure, and controlled exchange of data between applications. And today we're going to hear from amazing panelists and a group that came together from different states that are also focusing on interoperability. I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. So we will start with Dan, if you want to do a quick introduction.
Hi, my name is Dan Rallier. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the South Carolina Department of Education, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Thanks, Dan. And we'll go to Keith.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Keith Osborne, and I'm the Chief Information Officer and the Deputy Superintendent for Tech Services for the state of Georgia's Department of Education. Happy to be here and glad to be with all of you. Vanessa?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I am Vanessa Wren. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction, and I am delighted to share with you today.
Great. And BJ.
Hi, BJ Galapudi. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Tennessee Department of Education, and happy to be here and sharing with everyone today our experiences.
Great. We have this wonderful group of panelists and a collaboratory that came together. So again, any questions you have throughout this presentation, please put them into the chat. We want to make sure that we get them answered. But I will pass it to Vanessa to kick us off and tell us a little bit more about the Ed-Tech Collaboratory.
Thank you, Chloe. Well, the Ed-Tech Collaboratory actually started very informally between state CIOs. And namely North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Tennessee, where we were already sharing things around how we can best design our data ecosystem so we can share with each other better. Certainly, we've always had a spirit of sharing and collaboration, but then it being able to formalize this by the Ed-Tech Collaboratory has provided us a platform to create a group that's ran by states, for states, where we can look at our standards and making our standards truly standards between us to drive innovation and collaboration. So we're able to leverage all of our expertise areas and now formalize our partnership through the Ed-Tech Collaboratory, where we have come together to actually create more common good between the states, not losing our states' independence, because we still have things that are absolutely special just for our state, but being able to work together to create common data strategies and reference architecture so we can share data stacks and create software tools that we can use between us. It's actually an economies of scale. And what we're doing, we hope, will actually benefit the entire nation and hopefully the world beyond what we're doing here along the East Coast. And it's also one of the things that we probably enjoy the most because we get to work with our colleagues. There's only 50 of us in our specific role, and we have many things in common, and we're able to come together and do more and do more better by working together through the Ed-Tech Collaboratory.
So the Ed-Tech Collaboratory and standards. So depending on how you view interoperability or at the most narrow scope, right? It's exchanging data between two source systems. But and for those two source systems to work together, they have to be able to trade data back and forth. And that is probably the smallest size that makes any sense at all in terms of being able to interoperate. But the days where you're just swapping information back and forth between two source systems, very few districts live in that world anymore, much less a state or being able to be scalable across multiple states. Interoperability in our core is growing, or the meaning is growing, right? In order for that to happen, you have to have three core elements. There has to be a mechanism for moving the data, whether it's flat file or an API or some other connection between the systems. You have to have a structure to the message, right? So it's replicable across different systems. Otherwise, you're recreating individual connections in a way that isn't interoperable. And then you actually have to have a shared meaning that says, when we move this message from one place to another, and we use this descriptor or this word, it has to mean the same thing for everybody who's living in that ecosystem. So all interoperability functions within an ecosystem that has to support all three of those things, all right? And large districts were able to define and govern that for themselves, and other districts, came up with independent meanings a lot of time, right? But how then do you scale that? How do you grow an ecosystem that functions at a much larger level, whether it's a regional or a state level, right? So in order for standards to be fully leveraged within a state or across states, you have to design the system in a way that allows those mechanisms, message, and meaning, all three of those things, to be consistent within that environment. So yes, we have things that are different in our ecosystems, but we work hard at making sure that mechanism and message, right, are consistent, because that's the level of that you can start sharing software and sharing content at, even if we have to tweak meaning for our individual contexts, right? Our standards are not North Carolina standards, they're not Georgia standards, and they're not Tennessee standards. They are South Carolina standards, and we attribute particular meaning to the things that we want taught. So, but mechanism, message, and our means of moving those things across the wire, that we can share in a way that allows us to facilitate our ecosystems in a very real way. Next slide. So in order to kind of illustrate the point I was driving, I looked across some of the systems that are currently in place to share administrative data, whether it's the Common Education Data Standards, where you're going across state agencies, EdFi, where you're dealing with an interoperable hub at a district or a state level, or whether it's the school interoperability framework, right, where you have these the ability to move data over using an XML schema. So we have well-defined mechanisms in Ed-Fi and CIF, and we're seeing people start to build those mechanisms in the CEDS system. The message, again, is being defined. How are we going to exchange the packages of data and move them across? And then we were working on building code decks or meanings or descriptors or whatever we're going to call those things at the meaning level within any given ecosystem. So part of our discussion is very much how do we maintain consistency around mechanism and message and where we're going to share, and it's relevant, how would we share meaning? Next slide. So that's one, that administrative data is one half of the world, right? Or one part of the world. But when we start talking about how do we impact classrooms, right? That's a much finer grain, right? Where moving test questions across the wire is different than moving courses across the wire or our ability to exchange standards. So you have this kind of different grain sizes or different things to be shared as we look at digital curriculum or digital content, right? And then we can actually find that we're starting to leverage AI in order to share meaning or identify common meaning across states. It still requires human intervention to narrow it down, but our ability to go through a full set of standards has been greatly accelerated by using large language models as a filter to let a human develop some more nuanced meaning. So state governance allows us to support scalability across district systems and sets us up for that sharing of mechanism and message across states. Next slide. So here's where things start getting interesting, right? When you go and search the web about a particular piece of content, right, you can get a veritable flood of things. So we use standards and LORs to try and narrow down and determine what is high quality, right? But digital content still gets very, very small in what we can exchange. And when you force people to deal at a very, very small grain size, you start risking coherence and completeness, right? So where we're looking at the overlap between technology and curriculum, right, is starting to define the grain size for curriculum, right? So reducing teacher effort by right-sizing what information gets surfaced and where it's meaningful. And by the way, that is going to vary state by state or chief academic officer within a district by chief academic officer in a district, as they think about, you know, what do I want to put in front of a teacher in order to maintain to limit the amount of effort that they've got to put in and ensure coherence, right? So we're working with the idea of what is a pedagogical grain size, right? As opposed to the ability to move a test question or an image across the wire, but what kind of packages should be moved in terms of curricular sizes, so whether it's a course, a unit, a particular activity, or an element in an activity. So part of our discussion, right? And where we start leaning on other people is what's the right size of the pieces of curricular elements that should be shared or expressed inside of our different environments. So it provides for some very robust conversation around that topic. I'll give it to Vanessa.
Thank you, Dan. So one of the things that, we've kind of laid the platform of the idea, the vision, and what we can do. And Dan's done a really good job talking about the actual mechanisms and messages of interoperability. But we need a product, and I'll give you a perfect use case. In North Carolina, we are working towards what we call a unified transcript. So let me paint a picture of what that is. We know we have this problem. We know that learning can take place in many different forms and many different places. But at the end of the day, our learners need one place to go to capture what is that learning. And so typically that learning is documented on what is called a transcript. But there also can be job training and other certificates as well. So we have a vision that we could make obtaining a record of your learning as frictionless as possible. And to do that, we would like one point of entry for students to go in and our lifelong learners, right? This doesn't end at age 21 or 22, to go in and pull their lifelong transcript, a record of their learning. But to make that happen, you've got to have a lot of collaboration between many different partners and some common rules to do that. So let me just tell you a little bit about North Carolina's story. We know that we're working to increase our technical attainment of our citizens in North Carolina. We are currently between the 25% and 32% post-high school technical attainment. We have a goal in 5 years to move that up by at least 10 percentage points. And so one of the triggers for that is how can we create a unified transcript that makes it as easy as possible to collect all of your learning in one spot. So we worked with our General Assembly, and our General Assembly passed a law in 2023 directing us to do that, and we have started that work. So we in North Carolina have a statewide student information system, and we maintain that student information system that maintains the record of K-12. We also work with our University of North Carolina system office that has one single database of anyone who attends any of their colleges. But then we also have 68 community colleges, and they do not have one single database. And so we have worked to make sure that we can put all that information in an environment that is interoperable and that we are able to share. And our community college system is now moving towards one ERP system to do that. But in the meantime, we are using a mechanism that we call in North Carolina our UID, where we are able from birth to post-secondary track students where they are in North Carolina. So we've put a system in place now where our students will have one point of entry to obtain their transcript of anything that they've learned through K-12, and partnering with our university systems office and our community college office, including third-party credentials, to provide one place to go. And it's all very dependent on interoperable systems, as Dan has just talked about. And our plans are to expand that to private colleges and universities. And certainly we have many students who attend and earn, many citizens who earn learning outside of North Carolina. So the goal is that we work towards this between states. So if you are attending and earn credit outside of North Carolina, that's also at one place for you to find. We've worked out many of the kinks in North Carolina between our community college systems and our university systems and those types of things. But we also have to work on expanding our borders, and that's where we are and what we're working towards now. So a unified transcript with scalable solutions is one of the products that we're working on in the Ed-Tech Collaboratory, and certainly expanding this outside of the the Southeast, and the potential to have a transcript in place that would capture a single learner's record anywhere. Again, the end goal is to make sure we make it as easy as possible for our citizens to collect all of their learning in one spot and to use that learning to for workforce development and be able to show proof of what they've done. So that's been an ongoing story in North Carolina. We've just gotten started, and I feel really good about where we are with our university systems, our community colleges, and our K-12. And part of the work of the Ed-Tech Collaboratory will be extending beyond our borders through the interoperable systems that we are working to put in place.
Great. Thank you all. That was kind of just a quick overview. There's so much content and so much to be said about the Ed-Tech Collaboratory. I'm again going to put into the chat the site for everyone to check out. But at this point, we are going to switch over to just some general questions. We've queued up a couple panel questions, but this is really an open panel that we want to make sure that we answer the questions that you have for these speakers right here. So please feel free to put into the chat or in the Q&A function any questions that you have. Otherwise, we'll answer some of the questions in the time that we sorry. So I'm going to start with Keith. We'll start off with you. So maybe Keith, why is it critical that states work together rather than tackling digital transformation in isolation?
Yeah, so Chloe, that's a perfect question. And I want to go back all the way to some of the things that Vanessa said early on. Imagine that you've got, again, I'll set the stage. Imagine that we're at a national conference and you have VJ in the room, and you've got Vanessa, and you've got Dan and Keith, and typically there are others that are in the room as well. And, at the end of the day, we typically click together, we eat supper together, and then we begin to kind of talk about our jobs because, obviously that's the one thing that is central and union to all of us. And as we begin to kind of talk about, the things that we're trying to tackle, the initiatives that we're trying to, kind of solve in regard to our state, we began to see that commonality. And that really began to kind of morph into this idea of saying, well, Vanessa's talking about that she needs a universal transcript, and VJ and Keith are talking about, well, we're working on something that we call a navigator project, a career navigator. And we begin to see these consistencies. And Dan's doing some things over there because he's working with, eventually wants to do some competency-based reporting and those types of things. That began to enable us to see that really where there may be some semantics that are different, but really the challenge is the same. And we begin to kind of centralize on this idea of saying, well, what's the common way for us to work together? And that's through a standardization and interoperability. And we begin to envision this idea of saying, well, why does interoperability have to stop at the borders of a state? Why can't it transcend that state border? And then you see why, Chloe, this is such a critically important question, because it's exactly what you're asking here. Why should we be working in isolation if indeed we're really trying to tackle the same issues and we're really all in the same vertical, and that's being in the business of education, working with our teachers, certainly to the ultimate goal of enabling students to kind of do what they're there to do, and that is to learn, to succeed, and ultimately be, career ready once they're completed with their education. And so this suddenly is exactly that. What we found also compelling was that we were all typically within the same mindset. And we began to say, hey, what would happen if we, as a smaller group, being very agile, could actually move questions from the theoretical state, which is oftentimes where they're both created, and they oftentimes never get beyond that because of the volume of work and to the point that Vanessa said, where there's 50 of us. So we begin to say, well, if there's not 50 of us, what if just this small little group of 4 or 5 states could work so that we could get beyond the theoretical conception idea and literally have a pragmatic solution, with the ultimate goal of saying, could we help the nation as a whole allow itself to leapfrog, and other states would learn off of the work that we've done collaboratively together. And so you see in a myriad of ways there, that's exactly what this question is asking. Why should we be working together? It's because we feel like that we can move forward further, faster. We can certainly ensure that we have a more consistent problem that we've solved. and it is still with respect to the needs of the individual state, but through standardization, through interoperability, and through the leveraging of those standards that we all have seen mature over the course of years, we're actually going to help the nation as a whole and ultimately our education. So, VJ, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think I'll just add that on top of leveraging the standards and commonalities and the common mind thing, it's also leveraging resources. And that's really where we came a lot together, the four of us, in how we formed this work. In that I was trying to solve a problem, or I had solved a problem that Dan was then trying to solve, that Vanessa was then trying to solve. So not just people resources, but resources themselves around content, around information, around technology, and how things were developed. So I think everyone on this webinar understands the challenges that, from a funding standpoint, that education IT runs into. So if I can develop a part and Keith can build on that part, and Vanessa and Dan we can all build those things together, then we're sharing the resources as we work together to transform and to tackle the challenges that we're all trying to solve together.
Yeah, so VJ, I see that Brandy had two questions. The first she said was, when did we all first begin to kind of informally collaborate? And then did we ultimately start the ETC? Do you want to add, do you want to tackle that one? And then ultimately she said, well, what about other states and the opportunity to kind of join ETC?
Yeah, so when we first started informally collaborating together, I actually came to this group a little bit behind Keith and Vanessa and Dan, but we had a problem that we were trying to solve around digital content. I was trying to get digital content into Tennessee. Vanessa said, well, I have digital content that we can share. And and this actually started, as Keith referenced earlier, after a dinner when we were all sitting around after a CIO conference. And we started to realize, hey, we can all work together to solve this common problem. So I think that's where our informal collaboration started. And then our next meeting together, the four of us kind of officially formed this ETC group and codified what we're doing and how we're going to do it and the goals for what we're trying to accomplish. In terms of, is ETC open for other states and CIOs to join? We're always looking for other states and CIOs to add to the collaboratory. We do have a structure that we are working through on how we add CIOs and how we add states to make sure we're contributing to the whole. And we'll be glad to share some information out after the webinar as we're able to do that. There is a governance structure that we're trying to make sure we maintain in place. So as Vanessa said, there are 50 of us that could potentially join, and we want to make sure that we don't get bogged down in the theoretical and actually continue on the practical and the implementation. So those are the things that we're working through.
And VJ, I'll add to that to say that we certainly respect the national organizations. You hear us talking about those, and so we recognize the critical importance of them. Again, the whole reason why we're on this webinar is because we see the work that, Project Unicorn. We're familiar with CCSSO. We're all members of that, so we participate in that. One Ed-Tech. I see that there are members of One Ed-Tech on here. Ed-Fi. These are all very, very important organizations, and their work is critically important for the nation as a whole. Again, what we found was that, first off, we're central to one another, and so that kind of formality sometimes is broken down so that we can begin to really, really get to the roots of the problem and the discussion much quicker and in a much more informal state, which enables us to really leverage, kind of speed and agility again. That being said, to the point, which is, it's really important that you've kind of mentioned that, because we really see the whole idea, first and foremost, that everything that we want to do, we want it to be shared. As I said earlier, for this opportunity for this leapfrogging effect to have happen. But in that same idea, if there's another iteration of a collaboratory that began in the Southwest or something, we would actually applaud that, and we'd say that's a value. We think that's exactly what needs to happen across the totality of the nation as a whole, to begin to kind of see these entities kind of govern themselves, create that governance, because sometimes their problems are unique in some of those areas. But again, through standardization, interoperability, we think that we can collectively now begin to kind of amplify one another's work, which will ultimately get us to, that next version of what we need in the world of ed tech. What I sometimes call the efficacy layer is really what we're headed towards. But again, at the bottom of the line, it's all about teachers, all about students from that standpoint. Yeah.
Thanks,
Yes,
Keith.
and we have Wisconsin. Dan put that in the chat there. So yeah, Wisconsin's with us now too because of, again, shared problems, collective mindset. We said, hey, Lucas, you and your team, we feel like that, that collaborative space that we so enjoy could be augmented one more time. Come sit with us and let's all talk and plan. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, Brandy, for submitting that question. That was really great. I'm going to go to the next question, which is, how do you envision the Unified Transcript Initiative improving student mobility and access to opportunities across states? Maybe Vanessa, I know you spoke about what is going on in North Carolina and how it will transfer to this collaboratory, but maybe if you want to start this question off.
Yeah, I think the big question is actually twofold. Number one, how do we support our citizens? And number two, how do we support our workforce needs? And so the whole reason that we want to have this unified transcript and do that is to, again, make things as frictionless as possible to support our workforce needs, and also to be able to support our citizens in meeting the demands of those workforce needs. This certainly is going to include some horizontal alignment and some vertical alignments that we must have in place, and making attainment post high school, post bachelor, undergrad degree as easy as possible. The reason why we talk about a potential for a lifetime transcript is because we all want to make sure that we are supporting lifetime learning, again, to support the economic development of our states. And so I think the most important thing is being able to access those opportunities that we have between states to grow the movement of what a unified transcript can look like.
Thanks. Anyone want to add anything to that? Otherwise, we can move to the next question. Okay. Great. I will actually go back to this question. We did just get one in the chat. So what are the biggest barriers that would hold back adoption of broader data standards like the unified transcript across the sector? Anyone who wants to respond to that?
I'll start.
So,
go ahead.
Okay,
Keith.
go ahead.
I'll start.
No, go ahead, Vanessa.
Yeah, I'll just start. I think there's some cultural barriers. We talked about states, 4 states by states. But if you're a state and you are very deep on a standard, you might feel very hesitant to look at how you might change what you're doing. When you look at standardizing something, it impacts almost everything you're doing. And some of that's going to be a cultural change of how you are operating at your education agency. And also understanding and being willing to take a risk, like changing what you're doing to move to something different is always risky, and the ability to do that. So, VJ?
I was going to, along those similar lines, I think part of the challenges that we encounter and that we've seen is different adoption at different levels for what data is actually required within each state. Tennessee has certain requirements, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. We all have different requirements for the level of data that we capture. Some go really deep in certain domains, and some stay very kind of at the shallow at the top level. So I think getting to a collaboratory vision of how deep do you want to go and at what level can you share to meet each state's requirements ends up being some of the barriers that we work through, and that our program teams have to work through as well through us to make sure that we're sharing data and things like the universal transcript work for every state's needs for college admissions, for workforce development, and all those other initiatives that stem from having a universal transcript.
I'll just add to that just really quickly. You can tell that we're really passionate about that. Obviously, we see the value. I think testament to what Vanessa said earlier. We see the power of this to kind of support the workforce needs that are really evident right now. But really, I think one of the challenge points, just really parroting again off of something that BJ just said, in the world of technology, sometimes we talk about what we call the MVP, and that's when we build something, we say, what's the minimum viable product? But in this conversation, I'll introduce something I call the MVC. What's the minimum viable coalition? And that is the consensus of people that are outside of just the directive of education. Let's say the Department of Labor and some of the other workforce groups that have data themselves and have conversation and a vernacular of their own. Sometimes we don't see those intersect. And so that's where that minimum coalition has to be together. And our responsibility in the world of technology is to ensure that there's a transport mechanism that will enable a common vernacular, standardization of data elements, and those types of things to further enable a digital version of that conversation to be solidified in what we'd call a unified transcript. And I'm sure some of you have heard other things. We have what we call a comprehensive learner record or a learner employment record, learner information framework. There's lots of things that really kind of consolidate around this. But the idea here being that bigger picture of how do we get that really starts with the conversation first and foremost.
Keith, and another question, if you could continue on that thought, came in through the Q&A from Jim, asking if you could identify the difference between the universal transcript and one Ed-Tech's comprehensive learner record.
Oh, wow, that's really technical. I'm trying to think of a way that I could do that. Dan or Vanessa, I'm going to punt that one to you. Either of you.
I'll take a crack. I think there's differences in scope. Right now, the transcript is primarily around college credits that are earned, and we're seeing differences in some differences in meaning depending on who's looking at the transcript, whether they agree that a credit is accepted in math towards a degree program is the same in another degree program. So I think the unified transcript is the beginnings of the cooperative venture that would allow a comprehensive learner record to be well developed rather than something that's coming up through one particular organization issuing the record. So it's a point of view and common meaning and scope, I think, would be the primary differences.
And Dan, I'll add one more piece to that. The transcript in many states, and it is in North Carolina, is a legal document. It is a legal document that all institutions of education must maintain for their students. And you've heard of official transcripts, and that still is there. And the One Ed-Tech Learner Record is right now not a legal document, right? It cannot take the place of that legal transcript that students have to supply in different ways. So for me, in my view, that's one of the primary differences that we have in those two documents.
Thanks, Vanessa and Dan, and also Keith. We're going to end on one more question. We have about 2 minutes left, but I think this is a really good note to bring everything together. So what challenges have you encountered in crosswalking machine readable standards, and how have you worked to overcome them?
So I think One Ed-Tech's work in getting the machine readable standards across all the states in a single location, I think it's called the case network, was probably one of the largest hurdles. Being able to find the standards in a meaningful source and being able to source them there. The next step was just the sheer volume of standards, and do we mean the same thing when we're using words to express the idea of what a student should be able to do at the end of the course. So co-locating them, a standardized format for reading them in, and then the sheer volume of standards that need to be crosswalked as you look across pairs of states, much less multiple states. And that's where the AI tools have done a great job of taking something that would have been pairwise very, very difficult, and making it something that is manageable for a person to do in an afternoon or a very limited time frame.
Anyone have any last thoughts to add there?
Yeah, I'll add that the exercise of crosswalking machine readable standards, as we went through this with the case network and the work that that One Ed-Tech has done, we realized was a really difficult challenge because every state has their own standards, and crosswalking them exactly wasn't going to be an exact science. So we've also taken the approach in some of this of not necessarily trying to one-for-one crosswalk standards, but align content to standards as best that we can using tools available to us. And this is where we've started to look at tools like AI and human readable, human alignment of that content to best align it and make it a best fit for some of the content that matches standards across states, rather than trying to specifically crosswalk standards across states and make content fit every state, because we realize that's not doable. You're not going to get a one-for-one crosswalk in every state or in every case. So our focus is also making sure that there's enough alignment between content that it is reusable across states and we can share resources that way.
Thanks, VJ. And so we will pause here. Maybe I will just go to Keith for very last thought to take away that you want anyone to leave this presentation thinking about.
Yeah, so thank you, Chloe, and thank you everybody for being with us today. I hope that you hear the passion in our voices and this true sense of advocacy. You know, we challenge ourselves as state leaders to recognize the work that not only exists within our states, but also to appreciate the vertical of education and what is our role in the world of educational technology to support that. We see it growing. We see an importance of that. You know, we're listening to teachers who talk about the criticality of technology as a resource, a primary resource. And so really there's this urgent need for us to be about this business. The whole entire collaboratory idea, again, was to say, can we help aggressively address those and be very, very responsive to needs that are ultimately are timely enough that we can support what's happening within our schools, within our districts. And so we encourage you to share this same passion, this same level of advocacy. Let's let this thing grow. You know, we want to hear what's of concerning to you, because those are the things that I hope you hear us say, that we'll coalesce around those. As state leaders, that's what our jobs are to do. We're beginning to say, how can we do this in such a way that not only are we doing that work in our state, but we're impacting nationally, so that the entirety of education across all states will benefit from the work of just this. So thank you all for being with us today. We really just appreciate you all and the work that you do. You guys do the hard work. Our jobs are to support you.
Thank you for those final words, Keith. And thank you so much to our presenters, to Dan, VJ, Vanessa, and Keith from the Ed-Tech Collaboratory. We will send this recording and the slides out to all of those that registered. And we will send any links that are necessary from this presentation. If you are interested in learning more about Project Unicorn and knowing when publications and webinars are happening, you can connect with us at our site. And we thank you all so much for being here today.